Hey everyone, my name is Rehan and I wanted to talk to you guys about my GMAT journey and my experience with target test prep and how they helped me achieve a 730 on the GMAT. After finishing my undergraduate degree, I realized that I had a few months left before starting full-time and I wanted to make the most of that time. So I decided to get a head start on the GMAT so I wouldn't have to juggle that alongside working full-time. My initial goal for the GMAT was to score a 720. But when I took my first practice test, I actually ended up with a 560. So that was a huge indicator that I was a little bit rough on a lot of my basics in both quant and verbal. I knew that my math was a little bit rusty and I just needed to do a little bit of review. So I ended up purchasing some strategy guides that taught me some tips and tricks about the GMAT, thinking that that would be enough and I would have enough of a refresher on the material. So I spent about 3 months working with that material, and I found that although the tips and tricks, when I wrote my actual GMAT test, came in very helpful, at the beginning of my studying, they weren't too helpful because I was not very confident in my quantitative or verbal skills in terms of the basics. And so these strategy guides, they didn't really go into the basics. They seemed like they were geared towards people who already had a pretty good foundation in verbal or quant and just wanted to find a few neat tips or tricks or quick ways to navigate through the problems on the GMAT. After spending 3 months with these materials, I decided to take a mock test right before my actual test, just to see sort of where I was and if I was close enough to my target score of 720. Unfortunately, on that test, I scored a 620, so I was about 100 points off. My study schedule for the 3 months was pretty intense. I was studying about 4 to 5 hours every day. I didn't have too many commitments, so it was very doable for me. But I found that it was very hard to wake up every day and plan out what I was going to do, to constantly be coming up with my own study schedule and waking up and saying, okay, today I'm going to review this chapter in this book and then do these practice problems from the chapter and from the official guide. I felt like I was doing a lot of planning and that time could have been better spent just studying. So that was one of the downsides I found from using some of the strategy guides, was just that I didn't really have any direction and I felt like I was just constantly researching other people's stories, which you should do anyway, but I just felt like I was spending a lot of time doing all this planning and scheduling instead of actually studying, which was hurting me and wasn't really productive. And so after thinking about that, thinking about the fact that my resources weren't thorough enough for my needs, I decided to look into some of the alternative resources. And one of the resources that was highly spoken about, especially on online forums such as Reddit or even GMAT Club, was Target Test Prep. So I decided to try the $1, I think it's 5 days free trial. And I immediately fell in love with the platform, primarily because it got rid of my number one problem, which was figuring out what I needed to study and what practice problems I needed to do. I found that Target Test Prep had so many practice problems, whereas the strategy guides I had only had a handful of them. And I'm someone who really needs those practice problems to learn and to solidify a concept, and I wasn't getting enough of that from my strategy guides, and I obviously didn't want to waste any official guide practice problems that early on in my studying. I found that when I got to the sentence correction strategy guides, I was struggling a lot. My foundation in just grammar basics, and so I found that the strategy guides weren't too helpful in helping me build foundations in that area. It seemed like the strategy guides were targeted towards people who had a higher level understanding of these concepts or a more intermediate level understanding of these concepts. So when I did my free trial, one of the areas I looked at was the sentence correction module. And I found that it was super, super in-depth, and it started right from the ground. And that's exactly what I needed. So after doing the 5-day trial, I decided to purchase the dedicated study plan, the 4-month plan. So I began with target test prep. I would do all the chapters, maybe spend about 3 to 4 hours every day, use the active review sheets, and I found that it was so helpful. Everything on that platform was helpful. The way that every chapter was sort of planned out for you, the way that verbal and quant were sort of intertwined so that you weren't really studying one thing and then falling behind on the other. You were kind of going through both of them at the same time. And then obviously the plethora of practice problems was super helpful. And I think that was probably the number one most helpful thing that TTP provided me with. They also have so many different analytical tools, so you can see sort of your progress, your accuracy, how many questions you've completed, what chapters you're sort of weaker on. And all of that was really great too, closer to the end of my study when I needed to actually review concepts. But in terms of actually using the software, I found it was pretty straightforward. Every day I'd log in and just get to it, read the content, do the practice problems, do the tests. And there were just so many, and so many different problems that by the time you finish, the easy, the medium, the hard, you're a master at that topic. You're a master of that subject, and you can move on to the next chapter knowing that you're going to be okay with that subject on the test. So overall, it took me about 5 months to complete TTP. I did have to extend by a month. Even within the 5-month time frame with my trips and my breaks, I felt that anytime I came back to TTP, I didn't really lose any knowledge because obviously there are the end of chapter problems, but they also have, like a mid-section review, or I think quarterly section review. I believe they had four of them for the quant. And so that was super helpful because every few chapters you get to go over everything you've learned so far. And that just helps reinforce all of those concepts. So after spending 5 months with TTP, I decided that I was ready to start practicing for the official guide. While I was using target test prep, I actually didn't touch any of the official guide problems. I know that some people say to use target test prep in conjunction with the official guide, but I was really using target test prep to build on my basics and my foundations, and I didn't want to waste those questions until I knew I was confident in the material and that I wasn't using those questions to sort of learn the basics. I was more so using them to practice for the actual test. And so that's what I did. 5 months in, I spent a month just every day I was doing official guide questions, and then once a week I was taking my mock tests, the official guide test 1 to 6. I was taking those. On my first test, I scored a 720, and I was super happy about that. And then I kept practicing. I scored a 720 on my second, and then I scored 710 on my next two. It was at that point where I sort of had to make a decision on whether or not I wanted to move my test or if I wanted to take the chance. And, it didn't even really feel like taking a chance because I felt very confident in what I had learned from TTP. And I decided I'd take the test anyway. And if it didn't go as planned, I could always retake it and spend some more time practicing with the official guide problems, or, go back to TTP and work on some of my weaker areas. And so on test day, I actually ended up scoring a 730, which is above my target score. And I was super happy about that. Having a resource that has a schedule, has an itinerary, an agenda of what you need to learn, when you need to learn it, and how you need to learn it is so important, and it was crucial to my success. I think to build your foundations in both verbal and quant, and get as much practice in as possible without wasting those precious official guide problems, Target Test Prep is your resource. I only have great things to say about Target Test Prep, and I would highly, highly recommend it to anyone who's considering it. I wish that I, purchased my subscription to it so much earlier in my study process, because then I would have avoided going through, a few months of just navigating sort of what I need to study, how I need to study for it. Target Test Prep made that so much easier, and I could just wake up every day and study. That's all you want to do when you're studying for this test. There's so much content. There's so much you need to worry about when it comes to the GMAT. The last thing you want to worry about is what you need to worry about. Overall, if you are looking for a test prep resource that is going to help you build your basics in both quant and verbal from the ground up, as well as give you a clear-cut itinerary and agenda of what you need to study and when, Target Test Prep is your resource. If you've been considering using Target Test Prep, please, please, please use the 5-day trial. I cannot say better things about Target Test Prep, and I hope that after hearing a little bit about my GMAT journey and my experiences with Target Test Prep and some other test prep companies, you're able to make a decision that helps you get your target score for the GMAT. Thank you.